Section 9 of the Story of London. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Paul Lawley Jones. The Story of London by Henry B. Wheatley. Chapter 6. Manners, Part 1. Our notices of the sports of medieval London must commence with a reference to the curious essay of the monk Fitzstephen, who was the first to describe the chief features of London history. Quote, "Moreover, to begin with the sports of the boys, for we have all been boys, annually on the day which is called Shrovetide, the boys of the respective schools bring each a fighting cock to their master, and the whole of that forenoon is spent by the boys in seeing their cocks fight in the schoolroom. After dinner, all the young men of the city go out into the fields to play at the well-known game of football. The scholars, belonging to the several schools, have each their ball, and the city tradesmen, according to their respective crafts, have theirs. The more aged men, the fathers of the players and the wealthy citizens, come on horseback to see the contests of the young men, with whom, after their manner, they participate, their natural heat seeming to be aroused by the sight of so much agility, and by their participation in the amusements of unrestrained youth. Every Sunday in Lent, after a dinner, a company of young men enter the fields mounted on warlike horses, on coursers always foremost in the race, of which each steed's well trained to gallop in a ring. The lay sons of the citizens rush out of the gates in crowds equipped with lances and shields, the younger sort with pikes from which the iron head has been taken off, and there they get up sham fights and exercise themselves in military combat. When the king happens to be near the city, most of the courtiers attend, and the young men who form the households of the earls and barons, and have not yet attained the honour of knighthood, resort thither for the purpose of trying their skill." End quote. Footnote: Proclamation was made against playing at football in the fields near the city as early as 1314, during the mayoralty of Nicholas de Fardon. End of footnote. Then Fitzstephen tells of the sports on the river, but these remarks have already been referred to in the 4th chapter. The description of the sports of summer and winter are then continued. We find a curious account of the Londoner's delight both in sliding and skating, and his contempt for the dangers of the sports. Quote, "During the holidays in summer, the young men exercise themselves in the sports of leaping, archery, wrestling, stone-throwing, slinging javelins beyond the mark, and also fighting with bucklers. Cytherea leads the dances of the maidens, who merrily trip along the ground beneath the uprisen moon. Also, on every holiday in winter, before dinner, foaming boars and huge-tusked hogs intended for bacon fight for their lives, or fat bulls or immense boars are baited with dogs. When that great marsh which washes the walls of the city on the north side is frozen over, the young men go out in crowds to divert themselves upon the ice, some having increased their velocity by a run, placing their feet apart and turning their bodies sideways, slide a great way. Others make a seat of large pieces of ice like millstones, and a great number of them running before, and holding each other by the hand, draw one of their companions who is seated on the ice. If at any time they slip in moving so swiftly, all fall down headlong together. Others are more expert in their sports upon the ice, for fitting to and binding under their feet the shin bones of some animal, and taking in their hands poles shod with iron, which at times they strike against the ice, they are carried along with as great rapidity as a bird flying, or a bolt discharged from a crossbow. Sometimes, two of the skaters having placed themselves a great distance apart, by mutual agreement come together from opposite sides. They meet, raise their poles, and strike each other. Either one or both of them fall, not without some bodily hurt. Even after their fall, they are carried along to a great distance from each other by the velocity of the motion, and whatever part of their heads comes in contact with the ice is laid bare to the very skull. Very frequently the leg or arm of the falling one, if he chance to light upon either of them, is broken. But youth is an age eager for glory and desirous of victory, and so young men engage in counterfeit battles that they may conduct themselves more valiantly in real ones. Most of the citizens amuse themselves in sporting with martins, hawks, and other birds of a like kind, and also with dogs that hunt in the wood." End quote. It was one thing to go out into the fields to play these games, but when there was a large population within the walls, it must have been very inconvenient to the inhabitants to find the streets occupied by footballers. The practice seems to have been allowed until it became a public nuisance. In the year 1406, proclamation was issued forbidding hawking in streets of London. Quote, "Let proclamation be made that no person of this city, or within the suburbs thereof, of whatsoever estate or condition such person may be, whether man or woman, shall, in any street or lane thereof, take hold of or constrain any person, of whatsoever state or condition he may be, within house or without, for hawking on the Monday or Tuesday next, called hawk days, on pain of imprisonment, and of making fine at the discretion of the mayor and alderman." End quote. Hawk Monday and Tuesday were the Monday and Tuesday following the second Sunday after Easter Day, and Spellman describes the sport of hawking as consisting, quote, "in the men and women binding each other, and especially the women the men." End quote. Hone writes in his Everyday Book, quote, "Tuesday was the principal day. Hawk Monday was for the men, and Hawk Tuesday for the women. On both days, the men and women alternately, with great merriment, intercepted the public roads with ropes and pulled passengers to them, from whom they extracted money to be laid out for pious uses. Monday probably having been originally kept as only the vigil or introduction to the festival of Hawk Day." End quote. The proclamation of 1406 does not seem to have been effectual, and therefore 3 years afterwards another proclamation was issued against hawking, football, and cock-threshing. The prohibition of hawking is expressed in the same terms as in the proclamation of 1406, and to this is added the following, quote, "and that no person shall levy money, or cause it to be levied, for the games called football and cock-threshing, because of marriages that have recently taken place in the said city, or the suburbs thereof, on pain of imprisonment, and of making fine at the discretion of the mayor and alderman." End quote. Cock-throwing and football were especially in season at Shrovetide, and at that time it was difficult for the authorities to hold the Londoners in hand and prevent them from making the streets their playground. The cases of punishment already referred to are connected with prohibitions, but in 1389 a curious case of a fine inflicted for stopping a procession on the festival of Corpus Christi is recorded. A citizen was brought before the mayor and the sheriffs, recorder, and alderman to answer for having prevented a procession from passing through his house, which the parishioners believed to be their right. It is one thing for the inhabitants of a small town like Helston in Cornwall to pass through houses without hindrance on Furry Day, and quite another for the same right to be claimed in London, even in the Middle Ages. The case is so remarkable that it seems well to quote the whole statement. Quote, "Because that, by the reputable men of the parish of St. Nicholas Acon, Nicholas Twyford, knight, mayor of the city of London, was given to understand that whereas they, time out of mind, had been wont and accustomed to have free ingress and egress with their procession, on the befitting and usual days, through the middle of a certain house belonging to John Bass, citizen and draper of London, situate in the parish of St. Mary Abchurch in London, the aforesaid John, together with John Creek, draper, and others of their coven on Thursday, the feast of Corpus Christi last past, armed with divers arms, guarded the house before mentioned by main force, and would not allow the prisoners of the Church of St. Nicholas aforesaid to enter the house with their procession, as they had been wont to do, but grievously threatened them as to life and limb, in breach of the peace of our Lord the King, and to the manifest disturbance of the tranquillity of the city aforesaid. For the said reason, the same John and John were arrested. Afterwards, on the 26th day of June, in the 13th year, etc., they were brought before the said mayor and the sheriffs, recorder, and aldermen, in the chamber of the Guildhall, and were there questioned as to the matter aforesaid, and were asked how they would acquit themselves thereof, whereupon they acknowledged that they were guilty of all the things above imputed to them, and put themselves upon the favour of the court as to the same. And counsel having been held hereon, according to the usage of the city in like cases, it was adjudged that the said John Bass, as being the principal and the prime mover in the contempt aforesaid, should have imprisonment for 1 year then next ensuing, to commence from the Friday next after the feast of St. Botolph, 17th of June, namely, Friday the 18th of June then last past, and that on his leaving prison he should pay to the chamberlain of the Guildhall 200 marks to the use of the commonalty for the contempt aforesaid, unless he should meet with increased favour in the meantime, and that the aforesaid John Creek, for the contempt so by him committed, should have imprisonment for half a year after the said Friday next ensuing, and that on his leaving prison he should pay to the aforesaid chamberlain 100 marks to the use of the commonalty, unless he should meet with increased favour in the meantime. End quote. These were truly exemplary damages, and we find that the imprisonment was remitted on the same day, and the fines were respectively reduced to £15 and 100 shillings. Besides sports in the streets, there was a constant succession of pageants, processions, and tournaments in the Middle Ages, which made the streets gay, and brought out most of the inhabitants to see the sights. The royal procession arranged in connection with coronations were of great antiquity, but one of the earliest to be described is that of Henry III, in 1236, which was chronicled by Matthew Paris. After the marriage at Canterbury of the king with Eleanor of Provence, the royal personages came to London, and were met by the mayor, aldermen, and principal citizens to the number of 360, sumptuously apparelled in silken robes embroidered, riding upon stately horses. A very interesting point is mentioned by Matthew Paris, viz., that each man carried a gold or silver cup in his hand, in token of the privilege claimed by the city of the mayor being chief butler of the kingdom at the coronation. Something further respecting this claim will be found in the 8th chapter of this book. On this occasion, the streets of the city were adorned with rich silks, pageants, and a variety of pompous shows, and the citizens attending the king and queen to Westminster had the honour of officiating at the queen's coronation. At night, the city was illuminated with an infinite number of lamps, cressets, etc. After the death of Henry III, 1272, the country had to wait for their new king, who was then in the Holy Land. Edward I came to London on the 2nd of August, 1274, where he was received with the wildest expressions of joy. The streets were hung with rich cloths of silk, arras, and tapestry. The aldermen and principal men of the city threw out of their windows handfuls of gold and silver, to signify their gladness at the king's return, and the conduits ran with wine, both white and red. The coronation took place on the 19th of August. The happy married life of Edward I and Eleanor of Castile came to an end in 1290, and in connection with her death was arranged the most striking and most beautiful expression of a husband's and a nation's love in our history. The Queen died in Harby, Lincolnshire, and the funeral procession came slowly to London and Westminster. Beautiful crosses were afterwards placed on the various spots where each night the body stopped. 2 of these stopping places were in London, at Cheapside, beneath the shadow of Old St. Paul's, and at Charing Cross on the way to Westminster, where the Queen's beautiful tomb remains as one of the chief glories of our wonderful Abbey Church. Cheapside Cross was re-edified in 1441, and afterwards newly gilt and newly burnished. Defaced and repaired at different times, little was left of the original when the cross was cleared away in 1647, at the same time as Charing Cross. Only 3 of the original Eleanor crosses remain, 2 in Northamptonshire, one at Geddington and the other at Northampton, and the 3rd at Waltham Cross. Every Englishman should be proud of these glorious records of a past age, which not only tell of the devoted love of 2 sovereigns, of whom we all must be proud, but also because they prove the high state of English art at this time. Until late years, when certain documents were discovered containing the names of the artists, the historians of art attempted to believe that the designs were too good for Englishmen and must have been made by foreigners. In order to establish peace between England and France, King Edward married Margaret of France, sister of the French king, at Canterbury in 1299, and in the following year she first came to London. The citizens, to the number of 600, rode in one livery of red and white, with the cognizance of their mistress embroidered upon their sleeves, and received her 4 miles without the city, and so conveyed her to Westminster. Edward I was buried at Westminster on October 27, 1307, and his son, on coming to the throne, recalled Piers Gaveston from banishment. He made him regent of the kingdom when he crossed to France to be married to Isabella, the daughter of Philip IV. In February 1307 to 1308, Edward II returned to England with his bride, and was joyfully received by the citizens. On the 24th, they were crowned at Westminster. The king, we are told by Stowe, offered on the altar first a pound of gold made like a king holding a ring in his hand, and then a mark of gold, 8 ounces, made like a pilgrim putting forth his hand to receive the ring. The crush was very great at his coronation, and in it Sir John Blackwell was killed. In November 1312, Queen Isabel announced to the mayor her safe delivery of a son in the following letter. Quote, "Isabel, by the grace of God, Queen of England, Lady of Ireland, and Duchess of Aquitaine, to our well-beloved, the Mayor and Aldermen of the Commonalty of London, greeting. Forasmuch as we believe that you would willingly hear good tidings of us, we do make known unto you that our Lord of his grace has delivered us of a son." End quote. Afterwards, Edward III. The mayor and his aldermen and commonalty, on hearing the news, quote, "assembled in the Guildhall at time of vespers, and carolled, and showed great joy thereat, and so passed through the city with great glare of torches, and with trumpets and other minstrelsies. And on the Tuesday next, early in the morning, cry was made throughout all the city to the effect that there was to be no work, labour, or business in shop on that day, but that everyone was to apparel himself in the most becoming manner that he could, and come to the Guildhall at the hour of prime, ready to go with the mayor, together with the other good folks, to St. Paul's, there to make praise and offering to the honour of God, who had shown them such favour on earth, and to show respect for this child that had been born." End quote. At the beginning of the next week, all went richly costumed to Westminster, riding on horseback, and there made offering. After dinner in the Guildhall, quote, "they went in carols throughout the city all the rest of the day and great part of the night." End quote. The conduit of Cheap ran with nothing but wine, and a pavilion extended in the middle of the street near Broken Cross, at the north door of St. Paul's, in which was set a tun of wine, for all passers-by to drink of. In the following February, the Fishmongers' Company caused a boat to be fitted out in the guise of a great ship, to be drawn to Westminster and presented to the Queen. The fishmongers, very richly costumed, escorted the Queen through the city on the same day on her way to Canterbury on pilgrimage. In 1330 there was an accident during the progress of a great tournament in Cheapside, which was part of an entertainment offered by the citizens to the young king, Edward III, and queen at the birth of their first son. The Queen Philippa displayed the same good qualities which, on a later occasion, she showed after the surrender of Calais, and thereby secured a lasting fame as a good woman. Stowe relates the event as follows, quote, "There was a very solemn jousting of all the stout earls, barons, and nobles at London in Cheap, betwixt the Great Cross and the Great Conduit nigh Soper Lane, which lasted 3 days, where the Queen Philippa, with many ladies, fell from a stage, notwithstanding they were not hurt at all, wherefore the Queen took great care to save the carpenters from punishment, and through her prayer, which she made on her knees, she pacified the king and council, whereby she purchased great love of the people." End quote. This accident was the cause of Edward III ordering the construction in stone of a shed, Seldam, on the north side of Bow Church, so that the royal party might in future be able to view the joustings and other shows with safety. Edward III was for some years the most popular of our monarchs, for he was constantly conquering his enemies, and his people were proud of him. In 1343 a great triumph was organized in his honor, which is described in Sir William Segar's Honor Military and Civil. The king commanded that the tournament should be proclaimed in France, Hainault, Flanders, Brabant, and other places, quote, "giving passport and secure abode to all noble strangers that would resort into England." End quote. The triumph took place in London and continued for 15 days. Dr. Jessup gives us a vivid picture of what occurred 4 years afterwards. Quote, "When King Edward III entered London in triumph on the 14th of October 1347, he was the foremost man in Europe, and England had reached a height of power and glory such as she had never attained before. At the Battle of Crécy, France had received a crushing blow, and by the loss of Calais, after an 11-month siege, she had been reduced well nigh to the lowest point of humiliation. David II, King of Scotland, was now lying a prisoner in the Tower of London. Louis of Bavaria had just been killed by a fall from his horse, the imperial throne was vacant, and the electors in eager haste proclaimed that they had chosen the King of England to succeed. To their discomfiture, the King of England declined the proffered crown. He had other views. Intoxicated by the splendor of their sovereign and his martial renown, and the success which seemed to attend him wherever he showed himself, the English people had gone mad with exultation." End quote. 2 years later, in 1349, the fearful pestilence, known of late years as the Black Death, was destroying half the population of the country. One of the most interesting of London processions was that which took place when the chivalrous Black Prince brought his prisoners to England in 1357. Stowe's account of the historic scene is so vivid that it needs must be transferred to these pages without paraphrase. Quote, "Edward, Prince of Wales, returning into England with John, the French king, Philip, his son, and many other prisoners, arrived at Plymouth on the 5th of May, and the 24th of May entered London with them, where he was received with great honour of the citizens, and so conveyed to the King's Palace at Westminster, where the King, sitting in his estate in Westminster Hall, received them, and after conveyed the French King to a lodging, where he lay a season. And after, the said French King was lodged in the Savoy, which was then a pleasant place, belonging to the Duke of Lancaster. In the winter following were great and royal jousts holden in Smithfield at London, where many knightly sights of arms were done to the great honour of the king and realm, at the which were present the kings of England, France, and Scotland, with many noble estates of all those kingdoms, whereof the more part of the strangers were prisoners." End quote. The King of France remained a prisoner for 3 years, but in 1360 King Edward marched upon Paris, and peace was made to the joy of the French, although the English gained a third of that kingdom by the Peace of Bretigny. When the peace was confirmed, Edward III came to England, quote, "and so straight to the Tower to see the French king, where he appointed his ransom to be 3 millions of florences, and so delivered him of all imprisonment, and brought him with great honor to the sea, who then sailed over to France." End quote. On the 8th of June 1376, that flower of chivalry, the Black Prince, died in the Archbishop's palace at Canterbury. His young son Richard was then created by the king Earl of Chester, Duke of Cornwall, and Prince of Wales. At Christmas, the Londoners formed a torchlight procession from the city to Kennington in honor of the prince. Quote, "On the Sunday before Candlemas, in the night, 130 citizens, disguised and well horsed, in a mummery with sounds of trumpets, large trumpets, horns, shalms, and other minstrels, and innumerable torchlights of wax, rode from Newgate through Cheap, over the bridge, through Southwark, and so to Kennington, besides Lambeth, where the young prince remained with his mother. In the first rank did ride 48 in the likeness and habit of esquires, 2 and 2 together, clothed in red coats, and gowns of say or sandal, with comely visors on their faces. After them came riding 48 knights in the same livery of colour and stuff. Then followed one richly arrayed like an emperor, and after him at some distance, one stately attired like a pope, whom followed 24 cardinals, and after them 8 or 10 with black visors not amiable, as if they had been legates from some foreign princes. These maskers, after they had entered the manor of Kennington, alighted from their horses and entered the hall on foot, which done, the prince, his mother, and the lords came out of the chamber into the hall, whom the said mummers did salute, showing by a pair of dice on the table their desire to play with the prince, which they so handled that the prince did always win when they cast them. Then the mummers set to the prince 3 jewels one after another, which were a bowl of gold, a cup of gold, and a ring of gold, which the prince won at 3 casts. Then they set to the prince's mother, the duke, John of Gaunt, the earls, and other lords, to every one a ring of gold, which they did also win. After which they were feasted, and the music sounded. The prince and the lords danced on the one part with the mummers, who did also dance, which jollity being needed, they were again made to drink, and then departed in order as they came." End quote. On the 21st of June following, 1377, Edward III, deserted by his mistress, Alice Peress, and his courtiers, and attended by a solitary priest, died at Sheen, now Richmond. Before the breath was out of his body, the citizens waited upon the young Prince Richard, and offered their allegiance, requesting him to come to London. In Walsingham's Chronicle there is an account of a pageant in honour of the young king in the following month. On the feast of St. Swithin, the mayor and citizens assembled near the Tower, when King Richard, clad in white garments, came forth with a great multitude in his suite, also dressed in white. The streets were hung with cloth of gold and silver and silken stuff, and the conduits ran wine for 3 hours. At the upper end of Cheapside was erected a castle with 4 towers. In the towers were placed 4 beautiful virgins, of stature and age like to the king, apparelled in white. These damsels, on the king's approach, blew in his face leaves of gold, and threw on him and his horse counterfeit golden florins. When he was come before the castle, they took cups of gold, and filling them with wine at the spouts of the castle, presented the same to the king and his nobles. On top of the castle, betwixt the towers, stood a golden angel, holding a crown in his hands, and so contrived that when the king came, he bowed down and offered him the crown. There was infinite variety in these pageants, and they were very frequent during the Middle Ages, and long after, but the too full description of them is likely to become monotonous. It will therefore be sufficient to refer to some of the other rejoicings in a more succinct manner. On Friday after the Epiphany, 1382, the mayor and aldermen and commons rode to meet the new queen, Anne of Bohemia, and conducted her through the city. All the crafts were charged to wear nothing but red and black.
End of Chapter 6, Part 1.
End of Section 9.